Tommy, if you want.
Yeah, I just want to say, sorry. I'm getting off.
Okay. So last thing, by the way, just to say.
Yeah, I just want to say, sorry. I'm getting off.
Second, let's see if I can. Hopefully that worked. Okay. Okay. So last thing, by the way, just to say.
Yeah, I just want to say, sorry.
It wasn't me. No, that's not you. That's not you. I have the YouTube playing in the background. Okay. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties this morning. Right now, so a small group this morning, but nonetheless, we will go forward. Okay. Last we met 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the question of whether or not we left off with the topic of whether a person is obligated to ensure that their animal observe Yom Tov the same way that they are obligated to ensure that their animal does not do malacha on Shabbos. So we were up to Mishnah Berurah Sifkat on Yud Tes, which was commenting on the Ramah's psak. The Ramah says very clearly, we're on Reish Mem Vav. Sorry, I should also mention that. Reish Mem Vav Sif Gimel at the very end is of the Ramah's comments. I have a page 18 at the top of my page of the Mishnah Berurah. And it's very clear, the Ramah paskins that the Yom Tov ein Adam Mitzuve al Shvisas Behemto B'Yom. There is no and does not do for the labors. And the Mishnah Berurah then immediately explains why is that the case. So Yud Tes down below. The Shvisas Behemto Yalfinu Mimad Chesiv L'man Yanuach Shorcha B'Chamorecha Kamocha. Because the prohibition of Shvisas Behemto is learned from the verse that says, in order that your ox and your donkey shall rest like you. I pointed out last time 2 weeks ago that the kamocha, that pasuk is not accurate. It says in Parshas Veschanan, it says Laman yanuach avdacha ve'amascha kamocha, that your servants shall rest like you. And then it says Laman yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha. Doesn't say kamocha in Sefer Shemos. But the Yerushalmi reports the pasuk as appearing as such. So some want to say, I think it was Rav Chaim Kanievsky wants to say it's like a gzeira shava, laman yanuach. So you can also do by the transitive property, I think, right? You can also apply the kamocha to the animals, and that's a Shabbos pasuk. V'haikra b'Shabbos ksiv. That is talking about Shabbos. It's not talking about Yom Tov. Even according to the Ramah's opinion, you cannot rent out your behema only on Yom Tov, because that would be right. He says here, schar Yom Tov. You're not allowed to engage in business over Yom Tov in the sense that you're making this money solely because of what happened over Yom Tov. So the animal could work on Yom Tov, the animal could do work, could do malacha. You don't have to worry about it, but you just have to be careful when you're selling and you're renting out the animal. Just make sure that it's not only Yom Tov. That's a separate issue of schar Yom Tov. Same idea as schar Shabbos. V'hinei hamarshal cholek al zeh. The Marshal, I think Rav Shlomo Luria, he wrote a sefer called the Yam Shel Shlomo. He argues with the Ramah's opinion. And he says, "Vedato de Yom Tov v'Shabbos shavin hein bazeh kemo b'chol malachos." And there is no differentiation here about whether an animal can do a malacha on a Shabbos or Yom Tov. There's no differentiation, and the answer is that they absolutely cannot do malacha even on Yom Tov. Everything is the same when it comes to all issues by Shabbos and Yom Tov, almost. V'ayin b'magen Avram sheherich bazeh u'mevi b'beis habeis Yosef b'simen taf tzadi hey hevideos harishonim bazeh mitzadei sham le'isur. This is the Magen Avraham. Avram Gabiner was the well-known commentator on the Shulchan Aruch's work on Orach Chaim. So he speaks at length about this, about the opinion of the of the Marshal, and he also points out the Beis Yosef in Hilchos Yontiv later on in Shulchan Aruch brings various opinions amongst the early medieval commentators, the Rishonim, and over there, the Mechaber seems to side with the idea that it should be prohibited for animals to do labor on Yontiv, even if it's not for me. I'm not doing it for me, but they're doing labor, and therefore he says, we should be machmir. So notice the Ramah was Meikil here. People always say, oh, the Ramah is always machmir. The Ashkenazim always end up with a more machmir psak. It's not always the case. Here you have an example where the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, later on in Hilchos Yontiv, seems to be more machmir here about this issue, about shvisas behemto b'yontiv, and the Ramah is more lenient. The Mishnah Berurah, not surprisingly, says be machmir. That is very much like the Mishnah Berurah. You get all the shitos together, and al kein yesh machmir. Therefore, we should be machmir because we should try to make sure everybody's opinions are covered. That is a very Mishnah Berurah-like approach. Now, let's keep going here. The Vilna Gaon's commentary. Gam kein ha'erich bazeh. He also has a lengthy piece about this. Masik, and he concludes the ikar kedas marshal on Yiskarlel. He also concludes the Vilna Gaon. We should also be machmir on this issue and follow the Yamshel Shlomo, the marshal's opinion, that it should be prohibited for your animal to do work on Yontiv. The Gam lekamon b'simin taf tzadi heis. If Gimel nefarish hagra over there in Hilchos Yontiv, the Gra explains there's a prohibition on Yontiv, which is explained in Hilchos Yontiv, which is that you're not allowed to lay put a burden on the back of your animal and have them walk through town with the burden on their back on Yontiv. So the question is, why is it usher?
What if the animal's engaged in helping for food preparation somehow? I mean,
So
that's nefesh is allowed.
Excellent question. We're going to see a machlokas about that in just a moment. Hindu makes a great. I don't know if you could hear what it said. Hindu is saying that. What about if the animal's involved in the food preparation? And Yontif, you're allowed to engage in certain malachos. You're allowed to engage in if it's part of food preparation. So we will see in a moment here a machlokas about Hindu's question between the Achron.
That means the food you're using, whatever means that. Is that what she's
saying? Maybe an animal should be able, if a human being is allowed to on Yontif engage in cooking, for example. Now, obviously, animals aren't such quite talented to be cooking, but they could be involved in the process. You could find a way for animals to be involved. Or I'll give you the more easier one. The easier one is that there is a rule. This is there's a rule called hoil on Yontif. That once I'm allowed to do a malacha for cooking purposes, I can also do that malacha for non-cooking purposes. The best example of this is hotzah. I'm allowed to carry. I'm invited over to somebody for Yontif lunch. I'm allowed to, it's potluck, or I'm bringing something as a gift. I'm bringing a bottle of wine. I'm allowed to carry that wine, even if there's no eruv there. I can carry on Yontif when it comes to food. So the Gemara has a principle from Beis Hillel that Hoel, since I'm able to do it, l'tzorech ochel nefesh, hutra nami shelo l'tzorech ochel nefesh. I'm not allowed to carry for all purposes. And therefore, if I need to push a stroller has nothing to do with food preparation or a lunch or whatever. I mean, it gets how I get my child to lunch, but that's not food. So that is something that we accept halacha. So they're going to. So we'll see in a moment the machlokas between achronim whether or not hoel extends to animals. Maybe there is a heter that the malacha doesn't apply in Yontif, but maybe you can't say hoel by an animal on Yontif. It's. Frankly, I never would have thought to think like this. We'll see in a moment that. But here the point is that One second, Michael, I'll take your question. Just a second. That there's a halacha in the Gemara that says you're not allowed to lead your animal out with the burden on the animal's back. So now you have to say, well, why does the Gemara say it's usher? If you say, if your opinion is like the Marshal, it's easy. As the Gra says, hatamhu mishum shvisas behemta. Easy, because the animals are not allowed to do prohibited labors. But wait a minute. The Gra did a faster on you there. What's the problem with given what I just told you before? The behemoth can't carry on Yontiv because of Shvisas Behemta. What's the problem? We're allowed to carry on Yontiv. There should be no Isser in the animal carrying let's say you load them up. Let's even make it about food, by the way. You put lunch on the back of your donkey because you want to head over to your friend's house and eat lunch together. Right. Why should this be Isser? Right? I could put it in a carriage. I could put it in a bag and carry it. Why can't I put it on the back of my animal?
It's usher because the animal is actually used. It's a working situation. You can have animals that are pulling things. You have a wagon. You put it in the wagon. The animal's pulling.
Right, but
I'm not allowed to do
if in theory that I could pull the wagon, I was strong enough, I could pull the wagon. There should be no problem in pulling the wagon on Yontif.
On Yontif, I'm saying,
right.
But if you're using this on the Shabbos and in Yontif, they're almost exactly the same. Therefore, if I'm looking at it differently, if you're not able to use the animal on Shabbos for certain things, you cannot use the animal for the same reason on Yontif. It's not. That's probably what they're saying.
Okay, so hold on. So according to there in my fancy schmancy Dirshu edition, they write here, they quote, so you don't have this in front of you. People can carry on Yontif as long as there's some tzorach. You're not allowed to carry for no purposes at all on Yontif. So how you define no purpose, I don't know, because if you're carrying it, presumably you have a purpose for it. Probably the answer is, and this I try to be careful about this. Let's say you have a stroller. You know how much garbage collects on the bottom of the stroller because you went to the park last time and you still have the ball under there, or you have the whatever under there that you took. So you should try not to carry things that have no purpose for Yontif today. But if you're carrying your keys, you're carrying things that you may use, it's all fine. Anyways, once carrying was allowed on Yontif for food purposes, it's also permissible for non-food purposes. As long as it has a Yontif purpose, you carry the ball to the park for your kid or whatever you need to do. So he says here that, quoting in the name of the Gra, the Gra only allowed, the Vilna Gaon said that the mitoch svara, the idea that you can extend carrying shalol tzorach ochel nefesh, only applies to people, not to animals. He says, "Ach lo behema," and he quotes it from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that the intention of the Gra lesor afilu hotzas ochel al yidei behema mirishus l'rishus b'shvil ha'achila aval pi shala adam hutar lasos malacha b'ofen zel tzorach ochel nefesh. He says that the intention of the Gra here was to prohibit this, even if the animal is carrying food from one rishus to another rishus, from a private to a public domain, b'shvil ha'achil, even to eat it. Meaning, the principle here, according to the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, is that you cannot use the animal as a tzorach, as a means of tzorach ochel nefesh, even, which would be even more stringent view of what the Vilna Gaon said. The Vilna Gaon didn't say that, but the Vilna Gaon, according to our Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, would even go further and saying maybe that the animal to engage in this. Hold on now. The Aruch HaShulchan says the following. So what would the logic be? The logic would be the following. The logic would be that the pasuk that that extends ochel nefesh is simply one, or at least I'll say the principle of mitoch. Right, the principle of mitoch is built out of once something is okay, then it's okay for stuff to do other things. The Vilna Gaon must be thinking that this is a very specific. It's already limited to there has to be a tzorech when I carry a non-horses. One could say that was shalol tzorech. There's no such heter because by definition the animal is carrying whatever you want. It's not acting independently. So I don't know. I'm having trouble explaining why I shouldn't explain, but he simply thinks it doesn't extend to animals, that this heter, talking about human food. It's food for human beings. So I guess that's where he wants to draw the line. I'm not sure. It's not so easy, but look at the Aruch HaShulchan. He I think makes a little more sense here, in my personal opinion. I'm sure that I'm not understanding it only going perfectly. He writes, you don't have this in front of you again. Aruch HaShulchan says, first he says that some say it's mutter, some say it's us. Okay, and he says whether it's to carry whether a shvisas behemto applies or not. And he writes, even according to those who do say that shvisas behema applies on yontif, it only applies to malachos that are prohibited on yontif, kemo harisha, plowing, and things like that. But to have the animal carry for you, there is no biblical prohibition for your animal to carry on yontif. Again, the Gra may have felt like he was back into a corner because he had to deal with the Gemara that says "Ein motzi and masa ala behem v'yontif." So he said, "Oh, you see, the whole doesn't apply to an animal." That's how he puts the mathematics together. What's the svara behind it? I'm not sure. But here he says, no, it's us. It's not asur min Torah. The habesh Shabbos ha'isur hu below b'chatzer. Okay, fine. The Yom Tov, he says here, ain't half-resh bazeh. There should be no differentiation on Yom Tov. The Yom Tov leka isur hotzah. The animal has no obligation to observe hotzah. Beim tomar the Yom Tov asur gam b'chatzer. Nimsa Yom Tov chamer Shabbos. If you're going to start to say that Yom Tov it's more machmir, that the animal can't carry in the chatzer even, it becomes more machmir than Shabbos.
Right.
Okay. The Od, he says here, dilehedja amin b'Shabbos. The Gemara explicitly says you cannot say that an animal has a more stringent halacha than a person on Shabbos. So why would you think on Yom Tov suddenly you can adarabah behema kilatzvei? When it comes to laws about animals, and he writes here, what about the fact that you're not allowed to load your animal up? What about the idea that you can't have a masa on the back of the animal? And he says here, now I'm struggling to find it, but I don't. Hold on. Thought he was here, but basically one of them said that line in the Gemara was said me the Rabbanan, it's us, meaning that an animal's not allowed to carry things on your behalf on. Oh, here it is. I found it. Sorry. It says Omer betam velo rochvin al gabi behem exer. So you're not allowed to ride on the animal because because you'll maybe rip off a branch and use it as a way to enhance the speed of the animal. And also when it says you're not allowed to carry, same idea here that there was a fear that if you perhaps you're going to lead the animal along in a way that would you do something else, maybe it's pulling the branch off or something like that, and there's this whole prohibition is the Rabbanan.
So you're saying that he's saying something like what I'm trying to say between Yom Kippur Yom Tov versus Shabbos and Shabbos versus, it's almost the same thing, and you can't do certain things, and
or you can do certain things.
And you can do certain things, but when it comes to the animal, you got to be very careful because
that's the first opinion. That's the Vilna Gaon. But here, this one, and here's the Midrabanan part. This wasn't in the Aruch HaShulchan. He says here that according to that opinion, that it's not. There's no shvisas behemto. The isra otzas masal idei habehema b'yom tov ein elam midrabanan shelo yasa im behemto kederech Okay, it's because you don't want to start using animals like it's a weekday, and then you're going to start, engaging in business or whatever they're worried about. Okay, it's a fence against something. It's a derabanan, but it's not to say that midoraisa that there's any reason that the animal can't carry. That still applies as is. Okay, let's go a little bit further. I just closed that door.
You want me to try to close the door?
Mike, could you close it, Michael? That'd be great. I don't want to interrupt their davening. I'll wait for you to come back. So okay, fine. Okay, so we are now up to Sif Dalet. Okay, it was interesting. Whatever. So, by the way, bottom line, when it comes to the question about whether an animal can or can't do malacha on Yontif, it does seem to be that the approach of the Achronim, the Vilna Gaon, you see, the Mishnah Berurah, you see, Aruch HaShulchan leaves it kind of vague. He kind of leaves it up to you a little bit. Is that we are machmir on this question about shvisas behemto beyomtiv. Again, I don't know how many of you own animals. This would have been a much more contentious psak if we lived in a more agrarian society. But I'm not sure there are tremendous nafkaminas for us, who live in this community. Again, if you are a farmer in Israel or something like that, you own animals or livestock, whatever, maybe there's a lot more at stake here. Okay, now one more thing, by the way, before we move on to Dalit, is that so we're going to take a diversion. I'm not going to get to Dalit because I want to talk about this. The Aruch HaShulchan has a discussion here. This is more practical. I don't know if any of you here owns a dog or some other domestic animal. You have a dog?
We have.
You have, okay. So how stringent do we have to be against our animal doing malacha on Yontif? So he writes here, Lichaora, so just listen, I'll translate everything. Lichaora, kevan she'adam mitzuva shvisas behemto b'Shabbos. V'hainu shelo tasa malacha asura lanu. Since we are obligated on shvisas, certainly on Shabbos, forget Yontif for a second, and we're not allowed to do malacha. The animal's not to do any malacha that we're not allowed to do. How could you let your animal walk all over the grass? And it's grazing and it starts eating. Again, I don't know how many of you have cows, but when animals graze, they sometimes eat from the grass.
Right.
How could that be? That's tolash. That's one of the Fernam malachos to pull things out of the ground that are connected to the ground and start to eat the grass right then and there. So how could it be? And so he's acknowledging here that this is happening. And again, if you go back 100 years, I would imagine that some of our ancestors either had a cow or they knew somebody that had a cow. You had a cow, right? Exactly. That's where you got the milk. That's somebody in the Jewish community was providing these things for the Omnam, but Hilchot Mishpatim in the Medrash Halacha at Parshas Mishpatim on the pasuk of Laman Yanuach Shorcha v'Chamorecha. Tanya Laman Yanuach Shorcha v'Chamorecha Hosif Lo HaKosuf Nayich Achar Lios Tolish Min HaKarka v'Ochel. Look, I mean, in some ways it would be very pleasant. But you want to talk about what is it? Rest for animal. Grazing and enjoying the chew on the grass, and that's naechachar liot tolish min hakarka ve'ochel. They like to do that. That's very pleasurable for an animal. It's restful. Oh, eino ele yachashvenu letoch beis besoch beis. The Medrash says, or no, am I supposed to? Does it mean that they're supposed to really refrain from al malacha, and I should literally jail them in my house? So that they don't eat the grass. I should be fearful of this. So Amarta ein zed nayich elatzar, and that's not really restful for the animal. That's tsar for the animal. That's painful for the animal. The animal wants to be able to walk around. So this is the Medrash seems to say that it's okay if the animals, because it's acknowledging that tsar, it's not really rest for the animal. So the Medrash is already acknowledging that if your animal does such a thing, maybe it's okay. But the question is, how could you say it's okay?
It's natural for it to eat that way.
Right. So the early the asmachta be'almahu. The Aruch HaShulchan says it's just an asmachta be'alma. This whole Medrash is not the deraisa drasha. It's an idea. The reason he says that is because if so, Laman Yanuach when it applies to an Eved and an Amma, to the servant, same pasuk, the Yerushalmi makes a very close connection between the two. There it says that your servant should be, refreshed. Otherwise, first of all, you'd say the same thing by the Eved. Oh, they let them go do whatever they want. And no, the idea is that they have to be refreshed. Like don't start making, differentiation between this kind of rest and, a different word for refreshed. He says, here's the matter. An animal, we don't consider it to be thoughtful in a sense that it understands things the way that human beings do. Klal, at all. So lo shaykh ba ism malacha. The animal, there's no such thing as that you go over to Bessie the cow and say, Bessie, what you did, you violated one of the 39 malachos, and next time I'm going to give you hasra, and there'll be eidim, and it doesn't make any sense. The ha'isr who al habalim, it's on me as the owner of the animal to make sure the animal. Kishu ose ba malacha. Aval below a balim, when the owner's sort of not, considered in the situation. I'm not engaged in what the animal's over there doing its own thing. I'm over here. Lo shayach ba'isr. Says there's no isr. The animal wants to do its own thing in the backyard, and it's, I don't care, right? That's why the Gemara says you can take your animal out and stand it in the field, even though the animal might bend its head down and start eating. When it comes to the servants who are human beings, there it is on the person. They can't do the work. They're not allowed to. And the owner of the servants has an obligation, because they are knowledgeable people, these servants. The owner also has to ensure that they are not doing malacha. It's partly his responsibility as well, in order to make sure they have their proper rest. And so this is the difference between these two, and that's why if you have let's say an animal that's doing its own thing, again, not if that's lunch, by the way. If your idea of lunch is that you're going to send it outside, and that's if they're just doing their own thing, and they happen to pull some grass out. Okay, so the animal pulled the grass out, but I had nothing to. I really had nothing to do with it. I don't care if the grass gets pulled out. He's over there. If I'm telling the animal to do work, or I rent my animal out, and now the animal's doing work at the behest of the person who's renting it, that's a different story.
But
and that's
even with the food, are you allowed to go and put feed out or shop?
You have to feed the.
sure you can feed the animal, but you cannot give him directly from the ground. You can't say, here's lunch right here, come eat the grass.
Right.
If look, animals, you see this even with dogs, right? I never had a dog, I never had a cat, but you see dogs need to go for a walk. They need to go outside. If in the process of doing, what happens oftentimes, it's something to be careful. I don't know the answer to this question. What happens? Most people have dogs, I noticed. They take their dog to go do its business outside. It is interesting. If and I'm maybe a crazy machmir guy, but can you allow your dog to urinate on the lawn? Is there Gemara talks about this, about the idea of watering the lawn, how to water the lawn in general on Shabbos. So if the dog is, and so there's a chumrah by human beings doing such a thing on their own lawn. Can the dog do it? Because it's at your behest. You take the dog out, dafka, so you don't want it to urinate on the carpet. So you have to be careful about how the dog goes to the bathroom. And sometimes after the dog goes to the bathroom, you see how sometimes they dig up the dirt or whatever, they start kicking it backwards. Again, I don't know if I wouldn't go that far. I don't think that's digging a hole, but you may have to be careful about when you take your dog out. Just to be thoughtful about.
It's almost impossible to control that.
No, correct. If a dog, I don't think if a dog does his business, I would argue that it's probably a
That's the way-
secretia lo nicha, like, you know, you probably couldn't care less. Dog does it, doesn't do it, you know.
That's a way.
But
I would think of it.
yeah, I'm not a
That
dog
is
owner.
way-
But I'm just saying, like, something to start thinking about there, that, you know, that are there areas where, you know, pet owners have to be thoughtful about this question about when you take your pet outside on Yontif, let's say, is there anything that, you know, like, I don't think dogs pull up, you know, the grass from you know, from, it's not like it's something that they do, but I don't know, just something to think about. I don't know. We'll leave it at that.
Stuff.
But most of the things that have animals should be okay. I think that's what you see
It's
here.
not covered because they own dogs.
They own dogs, correct. I know, correct. The idea that, you know, there's this whole push against owning dogs. Again, I don't own a dog. I have no interest in owning a dog. It's not, it's so, I don't say it's distant. It's not genuinely what Jews used to own pets. Now, not pets in the sense always like that. They was but like Jews own animals. And I know it's a move away from owning animals now, but this was a real question for a lot of people. When you had a cow grazing in the backyard, you had sheep, you had chickens, and you know, you had to really start to think about, how do I make sure that I don't, you know, I don't put my animals in the position of doing malacha, particularly for something that I am interested in.
So the cleaning, the last thing you said is that's the way they clean up.
Yeah.
All right. Second thing